Hey, everybody. Welcome to Why Your Medical Practice Needs a Cybersecurity Risk Assessment. My name is Kensek Kunum, and I am the president and founder of Northstar Technology Group. We are a leading managed service provider and managed cybersecurity service provider. And we help organizations, primarily in the healthcare space, help protect their information and reputations from the bad guys. So, why are you here? Well, I'm guessing that you're probably here because you want to make sure that your healthcare organization is protected against cyber attacks. Maybe you're a CEO, maybe you're an IT director, maybe you're in charge of compliance, and this is part of your job and your responsibilities. Maybe you already have an IT department, maybe you even have cybersecurity liability insurance, but you're not sure if that is enough to really protect yourself or meet all of those HIPAA rules. And finally, maybe you're just wondering how to even start in protecting your organization. So, who am I? Who are we? Well, again, my name is Ken, and I own Northstar Technology Group. We provide cybersecurity risk assessments to healthcare organizations and other compliance regulated industries. And we've done this in nearly 35 different states across the United States. I'm currently a co author of a book called Cyber Attack Prevention, and we are a group of IT providers that have come together to write a book on cybersecurity risk and how to mitigate this by partnering with a company like us. I am current face of cybersecurity, Fargo Inc. magazine. We have an amazing, talented team of engineers and cybersecurity professionals that span several states. And currently, we work with over 100 businesses doing this exact same thing. So, what are you going to walk away from today? Well, hopefully, if I've done my job, you will learn what a cybersecurity risk assessment is, why you should have one, how much time it'll take, and what to expect during that process. Sometimes this can be confusing, and what your very next step should be to get your business covered and mitigate your cyber risk. So, during COVID, right? I mean, prior to COVID, of course, but during COVID, we started to see quite a huge increase in the threat landscape. We saw attacks go way up, right? Risks increase, and hacks and data breaches were occurring quite frequently. We work with a critical access hospital in the state of North Dakota that went through a ransomware attack just here this past Halloween. They were down for nearly 6 weeks, and this was an organization that had full backups. They were running their EMR, EHR system on premise at their locations, but they were partnering with a third-party vendor to host and manage their email. And that email server was compromised. They had a full secure tunnel back to the private network, and ransomware was detonated throughout the entire organization. Long story short, they ended up having to recover the entire system, rebuild all of the workstations, restore all of the data, and this took almost a month and a half. Why is that story important to you? Well, it is an example of one of many, right, that we've worked on and helped customers with that through our experience, we would like for you guys to avoid that pain. So what is a cybersecurity risk assessment? We call it a CSRA for short, but it's really cybersecurity risk assessment. First and foremost, it's a process that we go through to help and understand and identify potential vulnerabilities within your system. That could be with hardware, it could be with software, it could be from the outside, it could be from the inside. We use that information, of course, to help determine what potential consequences from a financial perspective breaching or exploiting those vulnerabilities could have to your organization. That can include financial losses, it could include reputational damage or even legal liabilities. Obviously, if you are on this webinar, you are part of a healthcare organization that is subjected to HIPAA compliance and regulations. We want to make sure that we help you bridge that gap as much as possible between where you are right now and what HIPAA regulations and the security rule says that you should be. And finally, of course, we want to make sure that we improve your efficiency, right, of managing this risk and avoiding downtime. So what do we do, right? So we call this the framework, but essentially the process that we use to help perform a cybersecurity risk assessment is to help protect four separate areas. Number one is the people. What we found in our experience over the last several decades is that the human element, the human operating system, is typically most organizations' weakest link. So we want to be able to help understand the susceptibility that your employees have to being compromised or allowing or facilitating a breach, and then provide solutions to help mitigate that, improve that situation. We want to protect your process, right? So there's often set of, we call them governance tasks, right? Your policies, your procedures, your workflows, right? So we go in and we work to understand how you guys manage data, in particular, how you handle protected health information, where you store it, how it gets transferred, and then work with you guys to help build and refine those policies in that process to make sure that that data remains safe. We want to protect the technology, right? So obviously, every healthcare organization is utilizing a lot of technology, and that could be network infrastructure, it could be mobile devices, it could be servers, it could be the cloud, it could be anything where you're interconnecting electronic information. We want to identify risks, vulnerabilities, and provide recommendations to protect that as well. And finally, last but not least, we want to make sure that we understand the data. And of course, coming back to healthcare organizations, that is understanding where your private health information is stored, and make sure that we also identify potentially other PII, such as social security numbers, credit card numbers, or financial records, or ACH, right? And provide controls and systems, right, to protect that information and only allow the people that need it to see it. So let's start with the people, right? I mentioned that that in our experience, the vast majority of cybersecurity breaches, the attack vector, right, which is the method that a bad guy uses to get into the environment, is through the people, right? So we want to make sure that we understand how susceptible your staff is to getting social engineered, how susceptible or understanding your staff is of recognizing cybersecurity risk and breaches, right? That is done through a few tests that we do. Obviously, we want to make sure that your staff and your team are educated and to prevent these things from happening in the future. The process, just an example, right? We talked about governance, right? We talked about process and policy. We worked with a mortgage company that went through a wire fraud breach where a customer, right, that was going to buy a house was attempting to wire transfer about $110,000 of funds that to an escrow company for down payment and closing costs for their house. What had happened is that this mortgage company had a business email compromise, and so the bad guys got between the mortgage company and that customer and intercepted those emails and sent this poor person fraudulent wire instructions, and she ended up wiring that $110,000 to the bad guys. Well, what does that have to do with process? Well, in this case, of course, it's how do you identify the right, correct wire instructions? What type of process do you put in place to help mitigate and ensure that person is getting those right directions and that they're following those steps? And then, of course, how to handle things if something goes wire. Technology, everyone assumes this is the most important piece, and it is obviously one of the top four, right? But everyone is comfortable, they understand computers as far as it being a target. But the truth is 60% of businesses will end up closing within 6 months of a data breach. We worked with a regional cloud computing vendor that had a server that was externally exposed to the internet. It had a vulnerability that was compromised. The bad guy was in the system for about 60 to 90 days, kind of looking around, right? Casing the joint, right? Doing their own reconnaissance to see what systems they could find, how vulnerable other things were. They ended up being able to go traverse laterally within environments. So they started in a data center in, on the East Coast, and they ended up being able to get into a data center that was Dallas, Texas, that held backups. They detonated ransomware, and that not only impacted customers' hosted servers and systems and critical applications, but it also affected their backups. This organization had to go through a very costly process of negotiating and paying a ransom to get their data back. All said and done, The ransom was about $150,000 that this company had to pay out of pocket and then go back to their cyber liability insurance provider to get reimbursement, plus another $150,000 for the forensics piece to make sure that the bad guys were still out there. Protect your tech. And then again, last but not least, is we want to focus on the data, right? We work with an organization, another hospital in the state of North Dakota that went through a data breach. They also had a remote server that was exposed, had vulnerabilities that was compromised. This one actually went as far as hitting the HHS, the Health and Human Services part of the Office of Civil Rights, through the data breach notification process, right? That all of you guys are required to go through in the event of a data breach. This resulted in an audit by the HHS that we helped navigate, right? By working through providing a third-party risk assessment that we're talking about today, building up governance and plans and security plans to help shore up all of the vulnerabilities that we found during that risk assessment. But all said and done, right? We're trying to do all of these steps in a layered approach, right, to protect that data. All right, so we talked about the four primary areas, right, that we're trying to protect. So Ken, well, how long will this take? The general process that we go through to do a gap analysis or a cybersecurity risk assessment involves, I guess, 3 or 4 different steps, right? Step one is we have a cyber strategy session with your leadership team. And that involves basically talking through what steps that we're going to take. There's going to be a series of meetings that we're going to have with leadership to understand how your data flows, right? Where you store it, how do you use it, what type of policies and procedures do you have in place, right, to protect that information. There will be a set of technical scans that we'll do. So we use software and hardware, right, to help us automate the process of identifying all of the assets that you have that could have protected health information on it, and perform a vulnerability assessment to determine if any of those things have holes. And eventually all of that stuff, right, leads to some sort of findings and recommendations, right? So we talk through that in the cyber strategy session. The actual cybersecurity risk assessment involves those steps that I mentioned, and that could take anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks, right? Depending how complex your environment is, how many locations you might have, and how many endpoints potentially. Once we have all that information, we analyze it, right? And that takes a decent amount of time. I would say give us about a week, right, to analyze this information. And from that, we build findings, right, which are general statements of fact of the environment that we observed. And then we build recommendations around those findings. The presentation will be to talk through, kind of in an educational format, what types of vulnerabilities, risks that we found, right? And how do we recommend that you remediate those risks and moving forward. A course of action involves, of course, remediating those tasks, right? But this is not a one and done thing, right? When we do a cybersecurity risk assessment, essentially it's a point in time snapshot of what your risk level is at that moment, right? Our course of action will involve how do you make sure, if after remediating these tasks, that you continue to make sure that you identify and understand future or new vulnerabilities and take care of those before it becomes a problem. But here's the thing, right? People always ask me, well, I have cyber liability insurance, Ken, right? Do I really need this stuff? Well, yes, of course you do, right? Not only do you need cyber liability insurance to protect you in case one of these layers, right, is not good enough, but often you are responsible for some of these things, even if you end up having insurance anyway, right? We found that most organizations simply just don't even have all of the controls necessary to, one, get cyber liability insurance, renew cyber liability insurance, or in worst case scenario, have to get a claim reimbursed. We've also found that many organizations simply don't have the right coverages, right? I've mentioned this cloud computing company. They didn't realize at the time, right, that they were required or responsible for paying that ransom up front, and then only later went through the request to get their claim reimbursed to get paid back. And we're starting to see some crazy things by cyber liability insurance providers, right? Where they're creating exemptions or exclusions for coverage or reimbursement for things such as acts of war, right? It's been a while, right, since the news has talked about Ukraine and Russia, right? But when that war first started to occur, we started to see some of the large providers like Travelers start putting acts of war exemptions in their plans. And there's still, some confusion and controversy potentially about what that means. But essentially, if a Russian ransomware gang, which is a real thing, can't believe I'm actually using the words Russian gang in a sentence in a webinar, but it's a real thing, right? Russian ransomware gangs, if one of those organizations happens to target you, your cyber liability insurance provider might say, hey, we can't cover this, right? Because it's essentially an act of war or nation state attack. You also may think, hey, I got an IT guy, right? Maybe even another IT company, right, providing this service to you. They're just taking care of this stuff, and they very might be doing that, right? But the idea, right, of doing a third-party cybersecurity risk assessment is to make sure, right, it's to allow you to sleep peacefully at night, knowing, yes, that this stuff is taken care of. What we see is often most IT providers, especially smaller or co-managed relationships, lack the tools and the skills and the experience, right, to really identify this stuff and take care of it. So where do we go from here? Well, you have choice, right? The first step is that you can try and do this yourself. Certainly, hopefully you have some information to start with, right? You can go and you can work with your internal IT department and essentially going through and try to identify what your vulnerabilities or risks are. The problem, of course, that we see is many IT departments or many IT employees are very good at certain tasks, and cybersecurity may not be one of those things. And I'm not going to say possible, it's likely, right, that they may miss some very high risk vulnerabilities. Of course, the alternative of that is to partner with a qualified team of professionals. And even if that's not us, right, vet out the organizations that you're working with, right? Make sure that they have the years of cybersecurity risk management experience. Make sure that they are vetted out, that they have the certifications, that they've done this before, that they've been in the trenches, right? They've fought the fight alongside other healthcare providers in battling these things. But this is what we do, right? I don't want to say we dream about cybersecurity like my slide suggests, right? But this is our world, right? This is what we do, right? We work with healthcare organizations to manage risk and help protect these environments. So what's it like working with us? Well, our essentially our motto is that we help companies protect information and reputations from the bad guys. That is what we do, right? And in particular, right, we focus on healthcare organizations that are bound by HIPAA compliance. We want to help you protect your information, your reputation, while also helping build efficiencies, right, to be able to help you run more efficiently and actually make more money. I think we got some questions, right? But I wanted to put the slide up here too. If you guys are interested, right, in booking a cybersecurity risk assessment or a strategy session, please feel free to head to info.northstartg.com/cyberstrategy booking page. You can screenshot this. We will be sending out this recording as well to those of you that registered, and we'll have Amber put that into that email too, so you can book directly with me as well. So any questions at all? All right. So we have a question. How much does a cybersecurity assessment usually cost, right? Very common question, right? None of this stuff is free. I completely understand. It really, of course, depends, right, on the size of your organization. But our goal, and this is something that we're starting to really to communicate, right, as part of our marketing strategy. Our goal is we want to help secure 1 million people, right? And so to do that, of course, we want to make sure that we are not cost prohibitive. So typically we start around $1,500, right, for an organization under 10 users, and kind of go up from there depending on complexity. Is it better to work with someone locally? Very good question. So we work with organizations, of course, across the United States, and typically the locations that we have a presence in, right, that we have customers in, we have an engineer local, right? But it's not required, right? So our sister company, Due North Information Security, does a bunch of different cyber risk management stuff all over the United States. We're in, I think, close to 35 different states now, right? And the reason why that most of these organizations don't care, right, that we're local, is the decision-making criteria is more about expertise and knowledge, right, than it is physical presence. We will be there in your city to provide this cybersecurity risk assessment. There's an element of physical security that we want to actually observe. We will be there, but you don't have to have someone living there. Will insurance cover us if we're in the process of fixing any vulnerabilities? Super complex question, right? You're talking about timing. So we work with cyber liability insurance all the time, right? And in fact, I guess the truth is, though, it's a relatively recent occurrence, probably since COVID. For the first 20 years of owning my business, I probably never spoke to a cyber liability insurance broker or carrier. Since COVID started, it's a constant occurrence, right? We're working with customers and organizations every single week, right, helping them fill out renewals and such, right? So of course, step one is to be able to make sure that you understand your risk going into working with a cyber liability insurance provider. Step two, of course, is as you're filling out their applications, you absolutely have to be 100% truthful, right, of the controls that you have in place versus the controls you wish you had in place, or to your question, the controls that you're in the process of putting in place, right? We have seen organizations say they're doing something when they're not. A cyber breach occurs, they go to insurance to have a claim reimbursed. They may or may not reimburse that claim, but I will guarantee you that if it's an expensive one in the millions of dollars, that cyber liability insurance company is going to investigate and make sure that those controls that you said you had in place were in fact in place. So I suggest getting a cybersecurity risk assessment and then working with a reputable IT provider in honestly and effectively answering those renewal applications. I hope that answers the question. It's a complex one, and certainly reach out to me and we can talk more. If we reach out about an assessment, how long does it take to get started? So typically the process is as follows. You book a cybersecurity strategy session, right? And they'll typically be with me, right? We'll talk through your organization. I'll learn a little bit about you. You'll learn some more about me. I'll ask some questions. You'll ask some questions. Essentially, if we come to agreement that we want to do a cybersecurity risk assessment, or that makes sense for you, after all the paperwork and all that stuff is signed, we do a kickoff call, strategy session with your leaders, and that could be done typically within a week, right, of you saying, yep, I want to move forward with this. My goal for our organization is to make sure that we hop on immediately organizations that recognize, right, that they need help in identifying risk in their organization. That's the only way we're going to help secure 1 million people. Any other questions? These have been good. These have been very good. Again, I strongly recommend that if you are on the fence on this, that you book a strategy session with me. It's 100% free, right? We can take as much time as you'd like to talk about your environment, your organization, see if it makes sense to move forward with something like this, or even just to talk through some of the stuff that we've seen, right? We do a lot of work with rural healthcare, and they're uniquely vulnerable. And so please reach out. I'd like to talk more. Any other questions? Might be able to give you guys back a bunch of your day today. All right, everybody. Again, thank you so much for attending. Reach out if you guys have any questions or want to move forward. Thank you so much.